Iowa Realtors. Greta Haas, Director of Government Affairs here with General Counsel Justin Hayes. Today we are going to get into the hot legal topic of protective clauses. So to kick it off, Justin, what exactly is a protective clause?
Yeah, and for the definition, I would actually rely on what the administrative rules say. So if we go to 193E and we look at Chapter 11.5, it's a clause in the brokerage agreement that states that if a seller sells the property to someone their former agent has introduced them to, or if a buyer buys a property viewed with a former agent, pursuant to a valid brokerage agreement, then within a certain period of time after that brokerage agreement expires, the client must pay that agent compensation. And one of the keys is that that clause has to be in the brokerage agreement itself. You can't try to enforce a protective clause if the clause doesn't exist in the brokerage agreement.
Yeah, that makes sense. So obviously we won't see these at all brokerage agreements, but it is at the broker level's discretion if they want to include those.
100%, absolutely.
So let's talk about, say a listing broker shows a property to multiple prospective buyers.
Yeah.
And the seller properly noticed after to enforce that protective clause.
Yep.
So then the seller enters into a new listing agreement with a different brokerage.
Yeah.
What happens in that case?
Yeah, that really actually depends on the agreement itself. So there are going to be brokerage agreements out there that say that when a seller client enters into a new brokerage agreement, a new listing agreement, that protection period from the initial listing agreement expires. It terminates. It's void, right? But you really have to review the listing agreement that you're using and be familiar with the language in that agreement to determine what happens in your hypothetical situation here.
Makes sense. So what do all of our licensees, our members, need to know about these protective clauses? What are the highlights?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is you really just want to review the agreements that you're using, right? You want to be able to educate yourself on those agreements, and you want to be able to educate your clients on those agreements so that they know what they're signing. That's a big deal. The second thing is if you are going to enforce one of these protective clauses, you have to make sure that you're following the rule in 11.5 from 193E that we talked about earlier. So with that, you need to make sure that there's notice that's provided in writing. You need to make sure that the notice is provided before the brokerage agreement expires, and expires might also include cancellation, termination, which are separate events, right? There's not much in the way of like case law or rulings on that, but that's my thought. You also need to make sure that that notice has a definite protection period. So it can't be indefinite. You can't just say, hey, this lasts forever. You and your client need to negotiate what that period's going to look like. So there's that as well. And then that notice has to be delivered in accordance with what the rules requires as well. So that could be by personal service or by electronic service or by regular mail or certified mail. That has to be postmarked prior to the expiration of the brokerage agreement, and you have to get return receipt requested. So you've got options, but you have to make sure you comply with at least one of those, right? So that's a big deal.
Yeah, and we saw that was a change. The electronic notice is new with some of the administrative rules changes that we've seen over the past year. So
yeah,
bringing protective clauses into the digital century, right?
Absolutely, and it's a good change. I mean, I think a lot of business is conducted digitally these days, right? Not positive, but I just have a hunch. So it's a good change for our practitioners. It's a good change for their clients. The last thing I would say is just make sure that if you are trying to enforce one of these protective clauses, don't present the client with a protective clause that has a pre-filled timeline that automatically on each one of these brokerage agreements says, 45 days, for example. That's negotiable between you and the client. You need to actually negotiate it. So that'd be the last thing I'd say on that.
Awesome. Well, lots of good tricks and tips when it comes to enforcing and implementing protective clauses. Thanks, Justin.
Absolutely. Thank you.